Everything you need to know about drum hoops, part 1. Welcome into this series. We're going to be taking a deep dive over the next few episodes on all the possible options for drum hoops that are in the Drum Factory Direct inventory, specifically for a 10-lug snare drum. This includes single flange, double flange, triple flange, diecast, some wood hoops, and some brass options. We're going to compare and contrast each of these hoops on the same drum and explain the different sounds, kind of the tactile experience of tunability, how well they hold their tuning, does it affect the weight of the drum or maybe the width of the drum, and just the overall experience with these hoops. The end result is to give you some knowledge if you want to start experimenting with your drum, because you can drastically change the way your snare drum sounds or any drum sounds, first of all with your drum head selection and then with your tuning. But then number 3, I would say your hoops. You can make a huge change to your drum depending, like if you go for instance from a thin single flange hoop to a heavy die-cast hoop. That's just going to be 2 almost totally different drums. So hopefully this information can help you inform, maybe you want to experiment or have some options to get the most out of your collection. Now, before we go too far into the product testing and demos of these things, I want to explain some basic terminology so we're clear on what everything is. The first type of drum hoops that had mechanical tuning had straight wood hoops like what you see here on this drum. This is a 5-ply maple wood hoop with claw hooks, which is a similar version, maybe a much rougher version of this you would see on drums from like the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's basically a bent piece of wood that's glued together into a circle, and then it tightens down to the drum with some sort of claw attachment. That's like the earliest form of a drum hoop. We can call that a no-flange hoop. It's just a straight wall. The bottom of the thickness of the hoop has to match pretty closely to the thickness of the flesh hoop on the drum head in order for them to sit. Disadvantage of these, first of all, they're made of wood. They're fragile. They can crack or dent over time. And also, that bottom side of the hoop can slip off the flesh hoop of the drum head if it's not perfectly aligned, which could lead to some tuning issues down the road. That said, it's a great option if you want a vintage style look and feel out of your drum. These are much better made. They fit quite nicely. I didn't have any issues with tuning slippage or with the hoop slipping off the collar during our testing, but it is something to consider. There is a metal version of a no-flange hoop. This is a 4.5 millimeter thick steel no-flange hoop that is unfortunately being discontinued. I think DFD still has some of these in stock. So if you want to mess around with these, it's a very thick, heavy, chunky piece of steel that's been bent and welded together and chromed. It does also require claws in order to function. So that's like a modern version of a classic straight no-flange hoop. It's hefty. This is going to impact the overtones of your drum quite a bit. It's going to give you a pretty strong emphasis on the attack, more controlled sound, and it is going to weigh your drum down a bit. So, but they're cool. I guess get them while they last. We're not going to use these in the testing because they are discontinued. Now, the first major development in drum hoops would be like this. This is a single flange hoop. So it started out as a straight piece of metal like this, but much thinner. And then the manufacturer bends the bottom portion outward to 90 degrees to create a wider, flatter plane for it to sit on the drum head. That's what this is. This is a thinner piece. This is actually 2.3 millimeters thick with a flattened bottom to create that flange. That's why it's called a single flange. It has one bend in the hoop. You do need claws, smaller claws, but you do need, actually we call those clips. You do need clips in order to use a single flange hoop. The advantage is it's a more open type sound. It's less metal. It's a little bit lighter because this is super thick, and this is a super thick wood hoop. So it's a bit lighter, so less impact on the overall sound. It allows the shell and the drum heads to resonate more. Disadvantage, you do have those clips, which can get in the way of your drumstick. And it has a more open, like the overtones can be pretty broad with this type of hoop. As we'll kind of hear and we'll evaluate that. The theory is it should give you the most open, kind of widest spectrum of overtones from your drum, which can be good or bad depending on what you like. If you like controlled, tight, and focused, I would not go with that. If you want to get the most out of your drum shell and have the most kind of color to experiment with, that's a good option. That's the single flange. We do have two versions, 2.3 millimeter steel, 2.5 millimeter brass. We're going to test them both. The next type of hoop would be the double flange. So if you had a straight piece of metal, you bend it out once to get your single flange, then you would bend it down again vertically to give you your double flange. It looks very similar to our single flange. The difference is, looking at this single flange, you can see the aluminum flesh hoop from the drum head underneath, where a double flange, it'll extend down over and it'll cover up that flesh hoop, which gives the drum a cleaner look. It also serves to stabilize the drum head inside the hoop. So there is potential with these single flange that it could slip off the flesh hoop of the drum head in some situations on some drums. So the double flange gets rid of that because the drum head just sits inside the hoop. Once it's locked in place, it's not going to go anywhere. So it still requires clips if you have the traditional style of double flange, but there is also a second version, which is what I have over here. This is a double flange, what we call a stick chopper. This was, I believe Gretsch introduced this first. So they put, on that horizontal flange, you punch holes in it, so now your tension rods can go through the hoop and you don't have to have clips, but it's still a vertical wall straight shot. This is also 2.3 millimeters thick. It's called stick choppers because you have a relatively thin vertical blade that can hack your drumsticks up. If you play a lot of rim shots or you play really hard, that can do some damage to your sticks. But it does have a really, really nice rim click sound, nice open response. I personally like the sound of these hoops a bunch, and we'll hear it to confirm whether my initial taste towards these is confirmed with our blind test. But it's a nice sound. So that is the double flange Gretsch style stick chopper hoop. Next up, we have this week's featured hoop style, which is the most common you'll see, which is the triple flange. So to explain it, again, you've got your straight piece of metal. The first bend comes out 90 degrees to the side to create a flat plane for the drum head to meet. The second flange bends that down vertically to create a nice channel to hold the drum head in place. The third flange happens on the top where your drumstick hits, and it's rolled inward on some styles, most commonly rolled outward. This is a triple flange hoop here. So that top flange is actually rolled outward, which makes it less sharp, so less damage to your drumstick. It also gives you a bit more surface area, so your rim clicks and your rim shots sound a little bit denser. I think it also makes it a little bit more sturdy. So you'll see these triple flange hoops on 95, if not more, % of the drums being made today. There are several different types of triple flange hoops. The thinnest is the 1.6, which is what we have here, 1.6 millimeters thick. That was a very common size on like Ludwig drums in the 1960s. If you have any vintage drums, most likely they have the thinner 1.6 hoops. The most common today is a 2.3, just a little bit thicker. Both of these are made of steel. There's also a 2.5 solid brass, which is a little bit thicker, but brass is a little bit more malleable, a little bit more resonant. So we'll see what that does to the sound. We also have 3.0, which is a quite thick triple flange hoop. You can't tell the difference when you're looking at any of these hoops. So you can mix and match if you really want to go down the rabbit hole of combining, a 3.0 on top and a 1.6 on the bottom for, maybe more stronger rim shot sound, but you want to keep the drum a little bit lighter. So we're going to test all that. And then there's one more kind of oddball. This is a Slingerland-style stick saver triple flange. It's still a triple flange, but instead of that upper flange rolling outward, it actually rolls inward and covers up just a little bit, almost covers up the bearing edge a bit. They call it stick saver. It was an answer to the stick chopper, the Gretsch, because it's rolled inward. Again, it's a rounded edge. It's not going to a knife blade through your drumsticks. These have a very interesting sound. Very, very excited to share that. If you haven't checked these out, probably the most unique sound of the bunch, definitely of the triple flange variety. These are also made of 2.3 millimeter steel. Probably the most recent development in drum hoops would be the Diecast. This is very popular in a lot of modern made drums, especially ones designed for high volume playing. These, instead of it being a rolled piece of metal that's bent into shape, this is actually melted metal that's poured into a mold to create the hoop from one, there's no bend, there's no friction applied to the metal, which it results in a very sturdy, very dense hoop with a lot more weight, more durable. These are not going to bend, whereas a triple flange or a single flange can bend over time if you play a lot of rim shots. I've never seen a diecast bend. They might crack under a lot of pressure, but they have maximum impact and power and durability, so that's why you see these on a lot of contemporary drums, especially snare drums. Also, because it's heavier, it controls the tone a little bit more, offers a little bit more focus. Gretsch, modern day Gretsch drums, most of them come with diecast hoops, so that's part of what you might think of the Gretsch sound is actually the control and focus that the diecast hoops brings to the equation. There are a couple modern wood hoop designs that have the tension rod holes drilled directly into them. This is one of them. This is a 13-ply maple contoured wood hoop that's been shaped a little bit closer to like a diecast hoop. Unfortunately, this one does not fit on our test 5x14 aluminum drums because the throw-off extends a little bit too high and was making impact with the hoop. We could try this on a deeper drum. We probably will in the future. These are very nice, very cool. The other option is this squared off Yamaha style. This, I believe, is 20 plies of maple with the holes drilled into it, and it's squared off. You see these on some Yamaha drum. I think the Steve Jordan signature drum has this type of hoop with the tension rod holes drilled into it. Very cool sound, one of my favorite sounding hoops, but it is 3/4 of an inch thick, so it will extend the width of your drum, basically by an inch. So if your snare basket won't hold a 15-inch drum, you're going to struggle getting this drum, onto your kit. Even the stand that we have in our test studio, it's a lightweight stand. It wouldn't go far enough. I had to improvise to make it work. So that's just a word of caution with both of these and with the 5-ply maple hoops with claws. The obvious downside is durability. So if you play really hard or hit a lot of rim shots, these are going to show wear quickly. They could dent, they could crack, and they're also flexible. So if they get wet, they could warp, they could crack over time. But they do provide a nice, interesting sound. Nice woodier rim shot, rim click, kind of just a more vintage overall kind of character. So if you're looking for like maximum warmth out of your drum, any one of these, as long as they'll fit, would be a good choice. And we're gonna hear them all in the next episode. This episode, we're going to dive deep into all the triple-flange varieties. So before we do that, I want to explain our recording setup and how we tune the drums so we can kind of establish our baseline. The drum that we're using to test all these hoops is a DFD 5x14 seamless aluminum. It has a 1 millimeter thick aluminum shell that's chrome plated with a center bead and 10 solid brass tube lugs. The drum head is a 10 mil single ply coated DFD head on top, a 3 mil single ply DFD clear on bottom, standard German style 20 strand steel wires, a standard heavy duty side action throw off. As far as how I tune these drums, I was very careful to tune, because we have 11 of these identical drums with the different hoops on it. I was very careful to tune them as closely to the same pitches as possible. So the bottom head on all the drums was tuned up to an F sharp 4th octave, which is, I would say, tight, but not so tight that it's choking the drum all the way. That was all pitch matched with the tune bot, and also I used a drum dial at the end just to make sure that the overall tension was consistent with all the heads. So they were all tuned up to an F sharp on bottom. They were all tuned up a 4th below that to a C sharp on top. Again, using the tune bot and the drum dial to be as consistent as possible to match the pitch of that head. I let them sit overnight, did some fine tuning again the next day to make sure they were the same. And then when I took them into the room, I had the snares off, hit them in the center, found out what that fundamental note was, and I got them all to be G. So they all start at G, and then I tuned them up to G sharp, which tends to be about as high as I would tune a drum. It's tight but not choked, so you're still hearing the shell and the hoops be involved in the sound. Then I go down to an F sharp, which ends up being kind of the medium tuning. Our starting point of G, I would say, is medium high. So medium high, high, medium to like an F sharp, and then I go 1/2 step lower to an F, which feels sort of like a medium, maybe a medium low tuning. I didn't want to go too far into the lower tunings because that becomes a specialty sound, and there's some tricks that you need to do with muffling and snare wire tension to make that work. I wanted to focus on the mid-range of the drum, which kind of brings out the most of the shell and the hoops and the heads. Everything's kind of singing together. So that's our, it's F, F sharp, G, G sharp. So it's a minor third kind of range that we're exploring. As far as the room and the mics and everything, I recorded everything in my office behind me, which is a 12 by 12 just office space with like 8-foot ceilings. The entire room has been treated by Audimute with their Acoust-Wood and some of their absorption sheets. So essentially the room has been negated. There's no room sound whatsoever. There's no reflections. There's no natural reverb. So you're just hearing the drum almost in like an isolation booth. Microphones, I'm using just Earthworks. I have the new Earthworks bass drum mic, about 3 inches from the front of the front head, off center just a little bit. There's an Earthworks overhead, just one centered over the kit, and then one of the Earthworks snare drum mics, 3 fingers width above the drum, just above the hoop, maybe slightly off the hoop. So you're getting, it's still aimed at the center of the drum, but if there's going to be any hoop sound, it's going to pick up a little bit of that. And that's placed under the hi-hat to kind of minimize bleed. And that's it. Those mics are going into my Allen & Heath CQ18T digital mixer with just standard processing that I would do on any recording to kind of remove any proximity or microphone anomalies. I'm trying to get just a flat response, normal sound, normal capture, tiny little bit of compression and limiting and all that just to bring the whole level up, but no special effects. And then that all goes into OBS and I'm just recording. So it's no editing, no mixing after the fact. Just what you see is what you get. Try to keep it as natural as possible. Trying to play as close to the same dynamic and the same velocity and all the demos. And it's me playing, so hopefully be consistent. So we can, as close as I can get to a scientific test here. So we're gonna start with the 1.6s, then we'll do the 2.3 steels, then the 2.5 brass, then the 3.0, and then we also have the Stick Saver Slingerland styles to check out. I should also add that I'm using ProMark Carter McLean signature sticks, which are somewhere between a 5A and a 5B, a little bit longer than 16 inches. It felt like that would be a good middle ground stick. For those of you who might use a bigger stick closer to a 5B or a smaller stick closer to a 5A. It's right in the middle. So you're getting, the best as I could to kind of just represent what these drums do for most people's situations. So let's dig in. We're going to start by checking out the 1.6 millimeter Triple-Flange steel hoop. This is the thinnest Triple-Flange hoop that is currently offered at Drum Factory Direct. It's the vintage style one you'll find on some old Ludwigs. Just to give you some specs here, the drum ended up weighing 6.2 pounds when I had the 1.6s on it versus where it comes stock with 2.3s, it clocked in at 7.3 pounds. So it's significant. It's about a pound lighter with these hoops. Just to kind of talk about the initial setup, as I was getting the head seated and tuned up, I did notice that it was quick to dial in to the pitch I wanted to, but then it got a little bit more difficult to fine tune it. So as I said before, this hoop is going to have the most overtones because of the lighter metal. So it was not tricky to dial in, but it just took a little bit more work to fine tune it. This playing demo, we're gonna first hear it snares off, and then a little bit of a groove, and then snares on, a little bit of a groove. The first tuning was fundamental note of a G, so I figure that is like medium high. Seems to be my kind of standard for testing every drum, not too high, not too low. Brings out the fullness of the shell, both without having too many overtones, and it's not choked. So it's kind of right in the upper range of where you can still get some meat from the shell. So we're going to go through, and I'll kind of like pause as I go and make comments about different observations. As I said before, this drum tuned up super quick, but it was a little bit tricky to fine tune each tension rod, if that matters, which you'll hear. hopefully, at least as I was playing, it resulted in the drum feeling more integrated with these hoops. The hoops weren't jutting out the attack too much. The decay was very even. Like after the attack, it felt like everything just sang smoothly. So let's check it out. Here it is. All right, I'm gonna pause it right there. With that rim shot, you can hear it just sings, and it's a very even decay. The drop off of, because you're hearing initially the attack of the hoop, and then the shell is vibrating, and then lastly you're hearing the drum head decay. And this to me is very smooth. That whole initial, hoop impact, drum shell resonance, and drum head decay, very smooth. Now here's like a reggae groove. So the rim click sound to me is clean. It sounds kind of normal. It's not really aggressive. So if you want a more kind of subtle rim click sound, but still have a traditional kind of bright wood blocky sound, totally fine. Now let's turn the snares on. Again, you're hearing a very even kind of drop off. Very musical. Wide open, sounds nice. Rim clicks with the wires on. Same thing. Okay, at that tuning, that's kind of, I love that tuning because it has a little bit of everything. You can hear all the overtones, but it's not like too laser beam focused on one particular frequency, which can sometimes happen with certain hoops. So this hoop to me gives you kind of the broadest, most complex sound from a rim shot with kind of the most subdued attack, the most integrated attack. Something to think about for your drum if you feel like rim shots are too bitey in whatever situation you're playing in. You might want to try some thinner 1.6 hoops. It'll kind of tame it down and kind of almost like compresses the attack so it lives down into the sustain a little bit more. I think it translates well to the recording. So next something I'm going to do is I'm going to tune it up a half step to G sharp, which to me is kind of like the upper tuning that I would ever put a snare drum. It's just such an even balance between the attack, the sustain, and the decay from my experience. Now with the wires on. You're hearing a little bit faster drop off because the head's tighter. So the drum head, the last thing to resonate has a shorter decay. But you're still hearing a smooth transition from attack of the hoop to sustain of the shell to the decay of those last lingering overtones of the drum head. Also can hear more of the complexity here. Back to rim clicks. All right, you get the idea. I really enjoyed the feel and experience of tuning this hoop up high. Just didn't have the bite that I sometimes get from high tuning on snares, especially with some of the other hoops. All right, let's change it over. We're going to go to the F sharp tuning here. As I'm looking back at me tuning in between, getting from G sharp down to F, this is where some of the fine tuning was a little bit more challenging because it would go below pitch and above pitch, and then it was kind of swimming around with the overtones, but it eventually settled in. All right, so we've got F sharp now, which tends to be where I end up tuning for most gigs. A little bit fatter, still very smooth. Hear more punch. Right, so the drum head is giving you more punch, but you're still hearing that clean attack that's well integrated into the sustain. So let's turn the wires on here and see what we get. A lot more vibe. You're kind of hearing the overtones swim around a little bit. A little self-indulgent. These get more self-indulgent as we go. All right, again, clean rim clicks. So you get the idea. It's got vibe, it's got character, but it's not too messy. It still has that kind of clean punch that I like. And we did one more tuning here, so we're going to go down to F. Usually the lowest pitch I find for like something that will live in the medium world. We're not getting to like specialty super low tunings. Great for recording. So this is F. First, with the wires off. Kind of sounds like some of the Bob Marley records where the snare is almost like has some distortion to it. You're hearing again the overtones are a little bit more complex, but it still has some nice like control. It's not too crazy. So let's get the wires on. That's it. That's the 1.6 millimeter triple-flange steel. I would, if I had to describe it in a couple words, integrated and vibe. It's an integrated sound and it gives you some cool vibe, but not too much vibe. So it's still a all-purpose kind of sound with a little bit extra like funkiness to it if you dial it in right. Or you can tune it up high and it's nice and clean. So that's the 1.6 triple-flange, one of my favorites. Next up is the standard 2.3 millimeter triple-flange hoop. This is what would come on this drum if you just ordered it off the website. This is what will come on most professional grade drums these days. This drum tuned up easily. It kind of dialed into the pitch, average. Everything about this hoop just felt like what I would expect. It took an average amount of time to tension it up to where I wanted it to. It took an average amount of time to fine tune it. It held its tune overnight pretty well. So this is kind of the benchmark standard 2.3 millimeter steel. This is what would come on this drum if you just bought it outright off of the website. It's what comes on 95% of snare drums that you just buy at a store these days. Same cycle. We're going to start at G and work our way up and then down. So here's G. Right away, and this happened in the room, it was a strikingly stronger attack, more bite, more separation between the attack and the sustain. It just felt more aggressive right away, and it does translate, I think, to the recording. It just feels more aggressive. I don't think the rim clicks are really that different from the 1.6s. It's just the rim shots way more aggressive. There's like a bigger spike to the initial attack, not as integrated. Okay, let's turn the wires on. Just a lot more bite. Like I'm hearing the metallic overtones way more with this hoop than with the 1.6. Let's go to the next tuning, G sharp here. Yeah, that attack is really poking through, which could be what you want. Definitely more of a timbali kind of percussive effect. All right, let's turn the wires on. So this has usually what I don't like at high tunings, that really metallic kind of over ring. These hoops are producing it. I didn't hear it with the 1.6s. That's usually the sound on gigs where the singer or the band leader or someone will be like, man, the snare's really bright. Can you like dampen it down a bit? It's usually those higher overtones that become prominent when you're in a not a controlled acoustical space. So again, rather than just start dampening the drum, the solution might be swap out these thicker steel hoops for some thinner 1.6s. Maybe get rid of it. Okay, let's go down to the F sharp. So those high overtones aren't there at the lower tuning, but it still feels like the attack has a more prominent spike to it. I mean, it's not super drastic, but there's just definitely a more distinct punch to that attack. No idea. Gets more self-indulgent as we go. You'll notice that the snare wires are coming a little bit loose there. This is one of my pet peeves with a new drum that hasn't had any tension on the snares before. They're still stretching and seating, so that's a total side discussion on someone should invent a strainer that doesn't require strings or anything that needs to stretch and get settled. That drives me nuts. I guess there are some options, but none that are too elegant that I've experimented with yet. So let's go down to F. See, I like the punch. It's a low tuning now. Kind of gives it some presence. I'll turn the wires on. So that is the 2.3 triple-flange steel. AB with the 1.6, kind of surprisingly, the opposite of what I expected. I like the 1.6 tuned higher, and I like the 2.3 tuned lower. So if you favor lower tunings, this slightly heavier hoop, I feel, gives a drum some, kind of holds it together a little bit more. And then at higher tunings, the 1.6s don't have that real kind of aggressive metallic overtone. To me, that was a surprise. Didn't expect that. I thought it would be the opposite. The thinner hoop would sound better lower, and the thicker hoop would sound better higher. Now for the oddball, the 2.3 millimeter stick saver that has the top flange actually coming inward. It's the same thickness as your standard 2.3, but it behaved very differently. Even just initially putting it on, it just felt less stable. Tensioning up the drum, it just felt less stable. It felt thin almost. And it took a bit of work to get this thing really dialed in tuning wise. So something about that flange being in instead of out, it just makes the hoop feel a little like maybe like you could bend it, a little bit. Which translated into, a interesting sound. So we're going to explore that now. Very different playing experience. This felt like it made this drum sound old in a way. or it made it sound like an old Slingerland, really. So here it is, the tuned to G, same starting point. Feels like more mid-rangey. It's a cool sound. It's not a focused rim shot sound. It's like this kind of like splat, almost. Just sounds like an old drum. This is a brand new drum. All right, let's turn the wires on, see how it performs. Hopefully you can hear what I'm talking about. There's like a mid-range kind of wow, wow. That's, to me, is just a characteristic of an older drum. So I would say this is not an integrated sound. It's like you hear the attack of the hoop, then it goes away, you hear the shell resonate for however long it's going to resonate, and then you hear the drum head. It's a very separated sound, which I think in turn makes the drum sound a little bit like, it's not fully singing. It's kind of like a little bit of some sort of control. It's multi-bands. You've got the highs from the attack of the hoop, the mids of the shell, and then whatever's lingering in the drum head and the sustain. Let's tune it up. It doesn't have that bitey attack. You're hearing more, I think you're hearing more drum head. Like you're hearing, to me, I'm hearing the drum head and like all the tone is coming from the head, the attack, the body, the sustain. I mean, if you blindfolded me and said, what is this snare drum? My first guess, I think, would be one of the Slingerland student model aluminum drums. So I think that the hoops play a huge factor in that Slingerland sound. It's like it's separated. There's like the high end, there's like some bite, and that goes away. Then you hear some sustain, and then the decay. It's definitely more controlled. Didn't feel as loud as the 2.3s. So let's go to the G. This is where it kind of gets like a distorted sound. Again, hallmark of vintage snares. You could dig that vibe. I like it. I like Slingerland snare drums. But it's like not holding together as well. It's kind of distorting and like splaying out. All right, let's turn the wires on, see what we get. Here I was just all over the place. It's like a soup, a snare drum soup. I dig it. Again, it's a vibe. It's a different vibe than the 1.6s. It's a little bit kind of reckless almost. Now here's the F. You're really kind of hearing the distortion, which could be cool, especially for recording. Drumhead emphasis would be the best way for me to describe these hoops. The emphasis of the sound is the drumhead. The hoops are kind of not playing as much of a role, almost like conga drums. All right, it's not perfect for everything, but it's got some throatiness. It would sit in the right track. It would sit perfectly with that kind of hairy edges of the sustain. It kind of would sit right in the pocket with some distorted guitars or something. Just it makes the drum a little bit quieter. So that's a word of caution. If you need it to be a super loud snare, this ain't the hoop for that. It's a more controlled, it's a more separated sound. It's a little bit wild and crazy. Still cool. All right, next up is the 2.5 millimeter solid brass. These are the most expensive hoops in the range because they're made of brass. They're heavier and they're very popular on snare drums. I tend to like them. Hopefully I can confirm that they're giving me what I want, like a step up kind of in fidelity. It like extends the frequency spectrum of a snare drum in a lot of cases. But let's check it out rather than pontificating. So this is the same thing. We're starting at G. Super smooth. To me, that's like a straight line from the attack all the way to the fall off of the decay. No spikes. Warmer, like more low mids coming out. It feels like the attack is just denser, fuller, not as bitey. I visualize a right angle triangle with a long slope. So it's a straight up, the attack is straight up, and then it's just a long, even, smooth slope down. No dips or valleys, no curves. So it feels to me like each backbeat is kind of connecting into the next one. Which, again, you may not want all that overtone. It's smooth, it's musical, it's rich, but it might be too much. Especially if you're close miking on a loud stage with a vocalist pretty close to you. I've had snare drums cause the vocal mic to feedback when they just have too much tone. That could be something to think about. It's very satisfying to play, though. I feel like what you put into the drum, it was giving me back. However hard I hit it, it gave me more tone. Hit it lighter, it was kind of warmer sounding. And this confirmed it, so let's go to the G sharp. Yeah, super smooth. Dense, not bitey. Pretty well integrated too, whereas the 2.3 steel had that kind of that peak in the attack. I don't feel like the attack is jumping out, and there's none of that high metallic overtone. Definitely a good choice for high tunings. There we go. Bring it back into control, buddy. All right, so if you blindfolded me for this one and said, what snare drum do you think this is? My first guess would have been a Black Beauty, which is a brass shell. So these hoops, to my ears right now, have taken this aluminum shell, which is generally kind of a transparent type of a sound, and it's given it that fullness and wider frequency spectrum that I expect from a brass shell with the hoops. All right, we're down at F sharp. Really musical, holds together nice. There's some extra low end. I feel like the attack has some nice punch to it. It's still not jutting above the tone. Yeah, that sounds like a session to me. Hopefully you're listening with earphones. Otherwise, these all just sound like noise boxes. So that sounds amazing. And what I like about that all that tone, that smoothest and long tail of overtone gives me some flexibility to control it. Whereas some of the drier hoops, what you get is what you get. If I need something with more tone, I have to go to a different drum. This, I can put a little bit of tape, a little bit of dampening, throw some rings on an handkerchief or something, just the tuning. And I can kind of dial it in, and it just feels like really, really musical and satisfying. So they are more expensive, but I think if you want to maximize the potential out of your drum, they kind of are it. But again, that might be the opposite of what you need. So everything has context. I would feel totally confident taking this drum with these hoops into the studio for almost any type of session. So it could be a good value for you. Think of the most integrated, the 1.6s were very integrated. These have a very integrated sound, very different applications. These 2.5 brass tuned up super easy. They held their tuning. They were very easy to dial in. The 1.6s, easy to tune, detuned a little bit more, and were harder to fine tune. So it's almost like if you want an integrated sound with maximum vibe, go with the 1.6. If you want an integrated sound with the most kind of hi-fi sound, these brass will get it to you. And the last triple flange hoop that we offer is a beefy 3.0. This is a weighty hoop. It ends up weighing, the drum with these hoops on it, 8 pounds. So significantly heavier than everything else. It's the closest thing to a diecast that you can get from a triple flange hoop. Again, the initial tuning was relatively quick. Getting up to tension was super fast, dialing it in. I found that with these heavier, stiffer hoops, it tended to be, the fine tuning tended to be a little bit harder initially. I think maybe because the hoop is not as flexible, so there could be some high spots, some low spots that are kind of hard to dial in. It didn't take tons of more time to get it fine tuned, but I did notice it took a little bit more tweaking to get it to finally settle in. Overnight, it actually increased tension, so that extra weight, it just helped the drum head seat better, and it was actually a little bit higher the next day when I went to see the checked initial tuning. It held its tune really well as I was playing it, didn't detune. It didn't require much tweaking at all while I was doing the testing. So it's a big, beefy, chunky 3.0 hoop, so let's check it out. Same thing, starting at G. So what I noticed with these, I'm remembering now as I played these, was strong attack, but it dies off real fast. So it's a quick attack that fades fast, and then you hear the sustain of the shell and then the drum head finally decaying. So it really kind of hits and gets out of the way quickly. You could think of it as more control, possibly. Very strong, very focused. Funny, to me, these sound less aggressive than the 2.3 steels. It's something about the extra density. It doesn't have as much kind of high-end bite, at least on this day when I was playing them. It's kind of a thicker sound and more focused and more controlled. It might end up that the standard hoop that we all use the most is actually the least optimal choice. All right, here's what the snare wire's on. You can hear it right there, that last rim shot, how fast it's like strong attack goes boom, dies down real quick, and then you're just hearing the lingering sustain of the drum head. Which I would say is the opposite of the 2.5 brass, which had a long tail between the attack and the final decay. This has a very short attack and sustain, and then that decay is what lingers. All right, let's go to the higher tuning. This should be, if it's going to have the bite, it would be here. Doesn't have it as much. It's got a strong attack, but I'm not hearing that annoying high end. Maybe you are. Maybe my ears are just damaged. I like it. It's a more focused sound, but not quite full on like Diecast. So it does have some bite. But what I like about it is it kind of hits and gets out of the way a little bit quicker. Definitely be a good choice if you're a hard hitter. All right, we're going down to the F sharp. I like this a lot. It's holding the drum head together very nicely. Hear that fast die off? I promise in future demos, I'll get all the notes out before I hit record. Okay, interesting observations for me. I like the 3.0 overall better than the 2.3 steel. I like the 2.5 brass best of all. I like the 1.6 really nicely, probably for acoustic situations, live playing, if I'm not hitting hard and I want the snare to just have a nice musical sound and not have anyone complaining about the snare drum on stage. So to me, the standard 2.3 is my least favorite. Curious what you think about that. We chose the 5x14 aluminum drum because it's the most kind of standard middle of the road drum. Most people have a superphonic or something similar. Aluminum tends to be pretty transparent, so the hoops are really contributing to the sound more than they would with like a super thick like bell brass or like a real thin 3-ply mahogany or something like that. So that's why we chose that drum. But again, they're gonna react differently on any drum you have. I think the general expectations should be there. So if you have any questions about these, let me know. Hopefully this helps you make some decisions for your future purchases. And then next time we will explore all the other types of hoops, our single flange, our double flange, and our wood hoops and our die cast. So see you next time.